The sun was already low and bleeding orange across the Texas plains when Caleb Harding rode back to his ranch alone, the way he always did. He was 42 years old, broad in the shoulder, lean in the waist, with hands that had been cracked and calloused by 20 years of rope, fence post, and hard prairie wind. His face carried the kind of quiet that wasn't peace. It was the quiet of a man who had sealed something off inside himself and thrown the key into a river long ago. His wife, Martha, had died 9 years back. Fever took her in 3 days. 3 days, that was all it took for the world to go silent. After that, Caleb raised his 2 daughters, Emma and Ruth, the best he knew how. Emma was now 19, Ruth 17. They had their mother's eyes, warm and brown and full of a light Caleb no longer believed he deserved to look at directly. He fed them, clothed them, taught them to ride and shoot and read. He did everything a father was supposed to do. But somewhere between the grief and the grinding work of survival, Caleb Harding had stopped being a man who felt things, and had become a man who simply endured them. The ranch was modest but solid. 40 head of cattle, a good well, a barn that didn't leak. The townspeople of Red Creek called him dependable, reliable, steady. No one called him happy. He unsaddled his horse, Buck, in silence, brushed him down with long, slow strokes, and walked to the porch. He sat in the same chair he sat in every evening, poured himself 1 finger of whiskey, never more, never less, and watched the last of the daylight die. He expected another quiet night. He was wrong. He heard them before he saw them, the sound of his daughters' voices, higher than usual, urgent, tumbling over each other the way they did when something had shaken them. Then hoofbeats, 3 horses, not 2. Caleb set down his whiskey and stood. Emma came first, her blonde hair loose and wild from hard riding. Ruth was right behind her, and between them, half draped across a horse, barely holding the saddle, was a woman Caleb did not recognize. She was Apache. He knew it immediately. The dark hair, the strong bone structure of her face, the beaded leather she wore, now torn and bloodied at the shoulder. She was young, mid-20s perhaps, and even in her broken state there was something about the line of her jaw, the way she held herself despite obvious pain, that made the word dignity appear in Caleb's mind without permission. "Papa," Emma was already off her horse. "We found her by Cutter's Creek. She was in the water, Papa. She would have drowned." "She's been shot," Ruth said, her voice steadier but her hands trembling as she helped support the woman. "Grazed on the shoulder. And she was beaten, Papa, before the water. Someone beat her and threw her in." Caleb was already moving. He didn't think. His body moved the way it moved when a calf was down or a fence was broken, with the automatic competence of a man who knew what needed doing. He reached up and lifted the woman from the horse, and she made a single small sound, not quite a cry, more like the sound of someone who had decided long ago not to cry, and was keeping that decision even now. She was lighter than he expected, and warmer. And when her dark eyes opened and found his face, Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a kind of tectonic movement, deep and slow, the way ground shifts before anyone on the surface knows an earthquake has begun. "You're safe," he said. It was the only thing he could think of. Her eyes studied him for a long moment, searching for the lie in the words, he realized, looking for the cruelty hidden behind the kindness. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. They put her in Martha's old room. Caleb stood in the doorway of that room for a moment longer than was necessary before he turned away. He hadn't been inside it in 4 years. Ruth, who had taken to medicine the way Emma had taken to horses, cleaned and dressed the wound with steady hands. The bullet had only grazed the top of the shoulder, painful and bloody, but not dangerous if kept clean. The bruises, however, told a different story. They were old and new, both layered, the way bruises get when a person has been living inside violence for longer than a single incident. The woman bore it all in silence. She watched Ruth work with careful, intelligent eyes. "What is your name?" Emma asked softly, sitting beside the bed. A long pause. "Naya," the woman said at last. Her English was careful and precise, more precise. Caleb thought from the hallway than half the men in Red Creek. "I'm Emma, that's Ruth, and our father is Caleb." Emma paused. "You don't have to be afraid of him. He's very quiet, but he's good." Naya looked toward the doorway. Caleb took a step back. That night, after his daughters were in bed, he sat at the kitchen table and stared at the grain of the wood and tried to understand what had come into his house. He told himself it was simple. She was injured. You helped injured things. He'd pulled calves from mud, set the broken leg of a dog that wasn't even his, brought water to a stranger on the road who'd been thrown from his horse. This was no different. He told himself that several times. He almost believed it. She healed quickly, or rather, her body healed quickly. The silence around her took longer to understand. She was up in 3 days, moving carefully around the kitchen, watching how things worked. By the 4th day she had, without being asked, begun to help. Small things at first: folding, carrying, then cooking, and here Ruth and Emma discovered that Naya's hands in a kitchen produced things neither of them had ever tasted, flavors that were warm and deep and surprising. Caleb said nothing about any of this. He nodded when she passed him. He was careful to make his movements slow and visible, never approaching from behind, never raising his voice, never moving toward her quickly. He didn't know if she noticed. He suspected she noticed everything. On the 6th evening, Emma pushed too hard with her questions, not unkindly, but with the relentless curiosity of youth, and Naya's face closed like a door. Later, when the girls were asleep and Caleb was banking the fire, he heard the creak of the porch and found Naya standing outside in the cool night, her arms wrapped around herself, looking at the stars with an expression he recognized. It was the expression of someone calculating how much they had lost. He came and stood near her, not too near, and looked at the stars too. "You don't have to tell us anything," he said, "not one word of it." She was quiet for a moment. "My band was scattered," she said finally. 2 years ago, the men who did it, some of them were soldiers, some were not. They came back 6 weeks ago. I ran, they caught me." She paused. "Your daughters found me." "Yes." "Why did you let them bring me here?" Caleb considered the question honestly. "I didn't let them," he said. "They brought you. I wouldn't have stopped them. There's a difference." She looked at him then, sideways, carefully. "Most men would have stopped them." "I'm not most men," he said. "It wasn't pride. It was just fact stated plainly." She looked back at the stars. "Naya," he said quietly, "that's a good name." "It means to look at, in my language," she said. "My mother said I came into the world with my eyes already open, already watching." Caleb nodded slowly. That, he thought, explained a great deal. The town found out, of course. Towns always did. Harding's girls had been seen riding hard with an Apache woman between them. By the time Caleb rode into Red Creek for supplies the following week, 3 different men had already offered their opinions without being asked. Walt Greer, who ran the feed store and had the self-appointed role of community conscience, was first. "You're taking a risk, Caleb. You know what people will say." "I expect I'm hearing it now," Caleb replied, loading a sack of flour. "Apache raids burned down the Kellerman place not 8 months ago." "Kellerman Place is 60 miles north. Different people, different trouble." Caleb set down another sack. "You selling this flour, Walt, or are we just visiting?" He rode home with the supplies and a set jaw, and said nothing to his daughters about any of it. But that evening he found Emma had overheard something in town. She had come home an hour after him, and there was a particular tightness around her eyes. "People are talking, Papa." "People talk," he said. "They're saying we should send her away." Caleb poured his 1 finger of whiskey, sat in his chair, and looked at his daughter. Is she well enough to travel? He asked. Emma blinked, her shoulders still healing. Then she stays until she's well enough to travel. After that, he paused. After that, it's her choice, not theirs, not mine, hers. Emma stared at him for a moment, then crossed the room and kissed him on the top of his head, a thing she hadn't done since she was 12 years old. He pretended not to be moved by it. He was absolutely moved by it. It happened in the way these things happen, slowly, and then all at once. He started noticing things. The way Naya moved through the morning, deliberate and quiet, like water finding its level. The way she listened when Emma talked, fully, completely, the way most adults had forgotten to listen to young people. The way she was teaching Ruth without making it a lesson, to identify medicinal plants along the creek bank. He noticed that she laughed rarely, and only when she thought no one would see, a quick bright thing that vanished almost before it arrived, like a match struck in wind. He noticed that she had begun to watch him the same way he had been watching her, with that same careful, measuring attention, not suspicious anymore. Something else. Something he didn't have a word for and was nervous to look for one. One afternoon he was struggling alone with a fence post that had heaved out of the frozen ground, wrestling with it, cursing under his breath, and she appeared beside him. Without a word, she took the other side of the post. He looked at her. She looked at the post. Together they drove it back into the earth. They stood side by side, breathing hard from the effort. "Thank you," he said. "You were doing it wrong," she said. He laughed. He hadn't meant to, and it surprised him, a short, rough sound, like a door opening that had been closed a long time. She looked at him with wide eyes, as if she too had not expected it. "My daughters tell me I've forgotten how to do things," he said. "Apparently this extends to fence posts." "They also told me," Naya said carefully, "that you haven't laughed in a very long time." The wind moved between them. "They worry about you," she added, "the way you carry everything alone." Caleb looked out over his land, his fence line, his cattle, his horizon. "It's my job to carry it," he said. "That's what it means to be." He stopped. "A father," she said quietly. "I was going to say a man." He paused, but maybe those two things got confused somewhere along the way. Naya was quiet for a moment. Then, "Among my people, a man who cannot receive help is not considered strong. He is considered incomplete." Caleb absorbed that in silence. "That's a different way of thinking about it," he said at last. "Yes," she said simply, "it is." 3 weeks after Naya arrived, they came. 4 men. Riders Caleb didn't recognize, the kind of men who had the look of people paid to do something no one wanted their name attached to. They came at dusk, when the light was tricky, which told Caleb they'd done this kind of thing before. He was on the porch when he saw them coming up the road. He stood and his hand moved to the rifle leaning against the wall and rested there, not raising it, just resting. "Harding," the lead man called out, big, bearded with cold eyes. "We got business." "State it from there," Caleb said. "You've got Apache property on this land. Woman named Naya. She belongs to the man we work for. She ran from a lawful arrangement." "Lawful arrangement," Caleb repeated very quietly. "That's right. You hand her over peaceful, we ride out peaceful." Caleb was aware, without turning his head, that his daughters had heard and were inside, and he prayed with everything in him that they would stay there. "That woman," Caleb said, "came to this ranch half-drowned and beaten. Whatever arrangement you're describing, it doesn't sound lawful to me. It sounds like something else." "That ain't your concern." "She's on my land," Caleb said. "That makes it my concern." The lead man's hand moved toward his hip. And then Naya was beside Caleb on the porch. He hadn't heard her come out. She stood straight, her shoulder healed enough to hold a rifle of her own, Ruth's, he realized, and she looked at the 4 men with those open, watching eyes, and there was no fear in them. Only a terrible, clear calm. "I know who sent you," she said, And I know what he'll do when I tell what I know about what he did to my people." She paused. "Tell him that." The men exchanged glances. "That's a bluff," the lead man said, but he didn't sound certain. "Right away," Caleb said, "and find out." A long moment, the kind that decides things. Then slowly the lead rider turned his horse. The others followed. They rode without looking back, which meant, Caleb knew, they'd ride to someone and report, and this wasn't finished. But it was finished for tonight. When they were gone, Caleb turned to Naya. She was still holding the rifle. Her hands, he saw, were very slightly shaking. "You knew they'd back down," he said. "I didn't know," she said. "I hoped." He looked at her for a long moment. "That was brave." "It was necessary," she said. Then, after a pause, "Thank you for not handing me over." "That was never a possibility," he said, with the same plainness he'd used before, the tone that wasn't pride, just fact. She looked at him. The stars were coming out. "Caleb," she said, the first time she'd used his name, and the way she said it made it sound like something she'd been deciding about for a while. "Yes." "I don't want to leave," she said. "I have nowhere to go that is safe, but I also—" She stopped, tried again. "I don't want to stay out of necessity. I've lived too long doing things out of necessity." He understood exactly what she was saying. She was asking him something, or telling him something, or both. In the plainest, most courageous terms possible, she was putting something fragile on the table and not looking away from it. Caleb Harding, who had sealed himself off and thrown away the key, felt the key surface. "There is another reason to stay," he said. His voice was low and careful. "If you'd be willing to consider it." She waited. "This ranch needs—" He stopped. Started again because she deserved the truth, not the practical version. "I need another stop." The word was out of practice. He made himself finish. "I would like you to stay, not out of necessity, just because I would like you to stay." The wind moved. The stars came fully out. Naya's face did something complicated, and then settled into something that wasn't quite a smile, but was warmer than one. "I'll consider it," she said. It came together the way good things come, not in a single dramatic moment, but in accumulation, in 100 small things that added up to something undeniable. She stayed. Spring came to the Texas plains and brought the wildflowers Ruth loved to name, and the longer evenings Emma loved to ride in, and Naya moved through those evenings as if she had always been there. And increasingly, impossibly, it felt to all four of them as if she had. Emma, who had been quietly mothering her father and sister for years with a weight no 19-year-old should carry, began to put that weight down. There was someone else now to share it. Ruth, who had been lonely in her particular kind of intelligence, had found in Naya someone who matched her seriousness and exceeded her knowledge of growing things, healing things, reading the land. And Caleb began to laugh more. Not loudly, not often, but the door that had creaked open that day at the fence post had been pushed a little wider, and then a little wider still, and the cold that had lived in his chest for 9 years began, very slowly, to release. He courted her the only way he knew, clumsily, plainly, without flowery words. He fixed the porch step that squeaked because she'd mentioned it once in passing. He found, on a trip to a larger town, a book written in the language of her mother's people, partial, imperfect, but something, and left it on the kitchen table without comment. He asked her one morning to teach him 3 words in Apache. He practiced them badly and made her nearly laugh, that full, real laugh that she almost never let out. Almost never. One evening in late April, with the sky going to purple and the cattle settled, and the girls' voices drifting from the house in easy conversation, Caleb sat on the porch steps and Naya sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and he said, "I'd like to ask you something." "You can ask me anything," she said. He turned to look at her. In the fading light, with her dark hair loose and her face at rest, she was the most complete-looking person he had ever seen. as though she contained a whole world inside her that the outside world had tried to destroy and failed. "Would you marry me?" he asked. "I'm not a man who knows how to say beautiful things. I'm not young, and I've got 40 head of cattle and 2 daughters who already love you and a porch step I just fixed. But I would spend the rest of my life trying to give you." He searched for the word, the right word. "Peace," he said. "The kind you should have had all along." Naya was very still. "I have not had peace," she said slowly, "since I was a child." "I know," he said. "You're offering me something I don't know how to hold." "I'll help you learn," he said. "You can help me learn some things too while you're at it." She looked at him for a long time, those open watching eyes, taking in everything, missing nothing. "Yes," she said. It was one word, and it was enough. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to move away, and took her hand. She turned her palm up and held his. Above them the first stars appeared. Inside, Emma shrieked with joy. She had clearly been watching through the window, and Ruth said something dryly that made Emma shriek again, and the sound of them tumbled out into the Texas evening like something that had been waiting a long time to be released. Caleb squeezed Naya's hand and didn't look at the house. "I'm sorry about them," he said. "Don't be," she said, and there it was, the full laugh, brief and bright, escaping before she could catch it. "Don't ever be sorry about them." They were married in June, on the land itself, because Naya would not be married in a church in a town that had not decided whether she was a person yet. That was fine by Caleb. The land, after all, was where everything real had happened. Ruth picked the flowers. Emma braided Naya's hair with beads she had quietly, carefully asked Naya to teach her to use correctly. The preacher from 2 towns over, a man with open eyes and a closed mouth about other people's business, spoke the words. Caleb said "I do" in English. Naya said the Apache equivalent, and then, looking at him steadily, said it in English too. The cattle were indifferent. The sky was enormous and clear. Red Creek talked, of course, and kept talking. Some of that talking softened over time. Some of it didn't. Caleb found he had less patience than ever for the kind that didn't, and made no effort to pretend otherwise. Naya built something over the years that she had not known how to name when Caleb first offered it. Peace. Not the absence of hardship. There was plenty of hardship because this was the frontier and hardship was the baseline of frontier life. But the presence of something steady underneath it. A family. A home. A man who moved through the world with slowness and care and treated her knowing as a gift rather than a threat. Emma eventually married a kind schoolteacher from a neighboring county and stayed close. Ruth became, over years of study and practice, something genuinely resembling a doctor, the first woman to be called that in Red Creek, and she went by it whether people liked it or not. And Caleb Harding, the single cowboy who had sealed himself off and endured for 9 silent years, learned slowly, imperfectly, better every season to feel things again. He learned it from a woman who had survived everything designed to break her, who had come up out of the cold water of Cutter's Creek with her eyes open, still watching, still refusing to be finished. He fixed the porch step. She taught him the words. She healed his daughter's loneliness, and he gave her what she had earned 100 times over and never once been given. A home. A name. Peace. And every evening that spring and summer and all the years that came after, they sat together on that porch as the sun bled orange across the Texas plains. And for the first time in a very long time, the quiet between them was the good kind.